There we go. All right, welcome everybody to the Monday night readings. So this night to tonight, this Monday night, we're reading Comrade Elder Aaron Dixon's book on the first unit of the Black Panther Party outside of Oakland. And then I'll show what the book cover looks like and the title of the book. And I'm able to present it in a PDF and scroll along as we read it. And since this is an official Second Rainbow Coalition reading, we usually like starting with the Rainbow Coalition Statement of Unity, which I will do right now. Everybody should see my screen. This is the book that we are going to be reading tonight, chapter 3, and it's entitled My People Rising by Comrade Elder Aaron Dixon, who was the captain of the very first Black Panther Party unit outside of Oakland. So with that being said, this is the Statement of Unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. And it says, we'll start with the preface, which is like a little bit of history. Let me make it a little bit bigger for y'all. There we go. Okay, the preface. The U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of the indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to quote unquote reservations, concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the eagle sunk its claws into other nations, making war on Mexico and grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, exploiting both the people within its boundaries and those in every other country, bullying them with the military interventions and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As Dr. Huey P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary, racism is a byproduct of capitalism. The working people of the world of every ethnicity or nationality face a common enemy that is destroying life on Earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met to live a good and meaningful life: food, shelter, healthcare, education, freedom from oppression by the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably. So that's the background to our Statement of Unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The actual statement says, the legacy of the first Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4th, 1969 by the original Black Panther Party, the original Young Lords, and Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight back against this capitalist imperialist system in various ways around particular demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the first Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established an Illinois chapter. Oh, sorry. This was the first of its kind that established a model class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle, quote unquote. He said, it's a class struggle, goddammit, end quote. By uniting the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor, the capitalist imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule and subsequently used the entire repressive forces of the state, police, courts, jails, prisons, and intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the United Front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriots organization, and other original Rainbow Coalition members, we establish our programmatic unity. The 6 disciplinary rules that we uphold ties our organizations and our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist, imperialist ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party and Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, and a united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people, boots on the ground. All right, all power to the people. Okay, so let me just check the chat real quick and make sure that if anybody is trying to join, that they're able to. And then I'll go ahead and get started reading. As I said before, my reading style is a little bit different, where we read and then if something rings true, or there's like a point that kind of sticks out with me, or if other people want to say something real quick, we usually stop and then I allow for a little bit of Q&A, and then we go ahead and continue. Give me just a second here because I'm just checking to see if anybody's trying to join, and we are good so far. Okay, so tonight's reading is going to start on chapter 3. This is the book right here, My People Are Rising, by Comrade Elder Aaron Dixon. And so with that being said, let me get chapter 3 up and then we will continue reading. I did notice one thing that I liked about this book, like Comrade Elder Hyde Thurman's book, Revolutionary Hillbilly, is that it's really cool to see some of these old black and white pictures. Some of these old black and white pictures, they, to me anyways, they speak volumes on the struggle. In Comrade Elder Hyde Thurman's book, some of the pictures of the destruction of parts of Uptown, excuse me, in some of the poor parts of Chicago in the 60s, and some of the stuff that the police were doing to some of the comrades in the 60s. I mean, you read about it, you understand it, because sometimes some of us may even face that now, but man, to see the actual black and white pictures, it was amazing. Okay, so there's number 2, and we are on number 3. Here we go. Okay, and y'all can see this, correct? Search for home?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let me make it a little bit bigger for my eyes anyways. Okay, cool. Search for home. There's a little part of a song here from Benny King, Stand By Me, 1961, and it says, when the night is come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, no, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid, just as long as you stand by me. Man, even just reading those lyrics, I can still hear the song. All right. And so it begins as, oops. There we go. I entered in this world in the dead of winter, not far from the cold, windy shores of Lake Michigan on January 2nd, 1949, almost 4 years after the bloodiest of wars and shortly before the beginning of the Korean conflict. By the time my parents finished their personal baby boom, there were 4 little Dixons and one who did not make it. Diane, a victim of premature birth, paved the way for my entrance. For many years, I felt I was living life for both of us. I always imagined what she would have looked like if she had safely made the trip. Joanne came first, taking the crown as the oldest. Then came Diane's short stay. Then I arrived. And then 16 months later, Elmer III emerged into the world. Finally, after 2 years had passed, Michael, the youngest, made his debut. We lived with my father's parents for a couple of years on Chicago's South Side at Langley Avenue and 51st Street. while my father completed his studies at the Art Institute of Chicago. When I was about 3 years old, we moved from Chicago to Champaign, Illinois. My father was offered a job as a technical illustrator at Chanute Air Force Base, which put his artistic pursuits on hold. We settled into Birch Village, formerly a military housing facility for Air Force pilots stationed at the base and their families. It would be our home for the next 5 years. Birch Village was made up of dozens of cement brick blocks in clusters, each 2 stories high, with cold gray cement floors. Though the place looked drab from the outside, this in no way reflected the true character of the village. Many of the families were just like ours, fathered by upstart young black men who had returned from World War II. These were men who had fought their way out of boot camp in the South just for the right to die in Europe or in the Pacific. Their wives were hardworking, strong-willed women. Birch Village was like one big family. You could go anywhere in the village any time of day and feel secure. Here, our family struggled through the same adjustments as most young families. Our parents strove to feed and raise 4 hungry, needy kids, each with a distinctive personality and specific demands, while my mother and father shifted their focus to parenthood after having spent their earlier lives only worrying about themselves. At 21, my mother had been 1 year shy of graduating from teachers college before my sisters and brothers and I came on the scene. Her time would now be devoted to washing, feeding, loving, disciplining, hugging, and teaching 4 inquisitive young people. Joanne coined the names for all the elders in our family. My parents were known as Mommy and Papi. My father's parents were called Didi and Granddada, and my mother's parents were called Ma and Papa. Everything seemed perfect and safe during those early years in my life in Birch Village. Everyone looked out for one another. As kids, we roamed around the entire perimeter of the village without a worry or care, getting into mischief and playing hide and seek and crash the circle. In the winter, we built snow forts and snowmen and sometimes huddled against the front of the door of the house trying to stay warm, wishing mommy would let us in. But with 4 kids, our staying in the 2 bedroom house all day was not an option. When that time came, all 4 of us had to go to our room, whether we wanted to nap or not. My good friends Lynn and Ricky lived in the end unit. Their family had just arrived from Mississippi. We spent the night at each other's houses and walked to school together. It seemed like we would be friends forever. I'm gonna pause right there real quick and just take a gander at the request and make sure nobody's trying to get in right quick, and then we'll continue. Nope, we're good. Okay. One of the elders of the village was Miss Naylor, a toothless and hair in disarray. We kids would sneak into her house, which was full of jars with weird things held in their confines. Everyone looked out for Miss Naylor. The only white people we ever saw were the milkman and the breadman, who would sometimes give us hungry kids free Jolly Rolls. How sweet is that? That's the class struggle right there, the workers seeing the
Yeah.
needs of the little ones. That right there, that's beautiful. On a day I remember vividly, my brothers Elmer and Michael followed me down past the fence around the village's perimeter and over a set of railroad tracks to a large rock quarry. We excitedly climbed the rock mountains as our feet sank in the gravel. We got stuck in a tar pit, barely able to haul ourselves out once we heard Mommy calling us. Aaron, Elmer, Michael. We clambered back over the fence with tar covered shoes and pant legs. I think that was the first time the 3 of us ventured out together to do something we knew we weren't supposed to be doing. Oh boy. Mommy got a part time job playing the piano at a local church. And at night, Papi worked a second job making pizzas. I still remember those nights when, after work, he would bring home delicious Italian pizzas to us waiting kids. And on weekends, Mommy and Papi would go out to parties with friends from the village, drinking scotch and bourbon, dancing bebop and the swing. During the summers, Papi worked in Champaign while Mommy and us kids went to Chicago to spend those months with Granddada and Didi and Ma and Papa. They happened to live around the corner from each other. Granddad and Didi lived on 71st and Calumet, and Ma and Papa lived on 69th and Prairie. At night, out in the yard, we would chase lightning bugs with our cousins Mark and Keith, known as Kiki. On quiet days, I sometimes went upstairs and Ma and Bop Bops to talk to Grandma, my mother's great grandmother, Emma, and listened to her stories of old while I brushed her long, silky gray hair, looking into her big, ancient brown eyes and touching her leathery, wrinkled skin. I loved spending those quiet times with her. They were the only connection I had to our family's long, sometimes difficult and painful history. When I was 5 years old, Grandma became very ill and requested that my mother send me from Champaign to her bedside in Chicago. Of course, Mommy thought it was rather ridiculous to summon a 5-year-old for almost 200 miles away, and so I did not go. Grandma passed not too long after at the age of 94, taking with her almost a century of history encompassing the African American experience. Wow. I would miss those summer visits when I sneaked upstairs to sit in silence, holding her caramel hands. Perhaps I remembered her of someone or something from her past. She reminded me of something I could not quite comprehend, yet I understood our special connection. Her face, her scratchy voice, her sometimes cranky disposition would always be there with me, following me, whispering to me, protecting me, and guiding me. When it came time for me to start kindergarten, I was not ready to leave my mother's side. I must have cried the whole day. First grade was easier since I started the school year with my new friends, taking shortcuts home through the Negro League baseball field, getting chased by the old black caretaker, barely making it over the fence, and laughing from the fear of almost getting caught. By the third grade, I dreamed of someday soon running with the Birch Village Cats, the neighborhood gang. I often saw them chasing their rivals, the alley cats, kids who lived outside the village. That was the first time I remember yearning to belong to a group. Up north in Chicago, I had only seen the hastily written chalk words of the Blackstone Rangers, Chicago's largest gang, scrawled on the walls and buildings throughout the South Side. I often wondered if I would join the Rangers when I got older. One night in 1956, there was a knock on the door, and standing in the doorway were two white men dressed in dark suits. Poppy didn't let the men in. He exchanged words with them and then hastily closed the door. He later told me that these men in the dark suits were from the FBI and they had come to question him about his involvement in the Communist Party. I got to start right there. Are you kidding me? Already, this young comrade, as a kid, is already experiencing things that um, revolutionaries, unfortunately, already do. And isn't it interesting how FBI, and if you think about it, I could be mistaken, but that was probably around the era of McCarthyism, right?
Yeah, it was. It was.
Right.
And
So we're talking about the
it was.
50s, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And can you imagine? I mean, there were rich, famous actors, white activists that were already getting pressed by McCarthyism. Can you? I'm just trying to imagine being a young black father with 4 kids, and then now this shit is happening. Oh my God! Talk about a fearful experience. I mean, and for what? Because you're trying to better your situation and try to better the situation of your people. It's almost disgusting how the imperialist machine that we call the United States, they don't get it. Like we don't want to have to do revolutionary things. We don't want to have to do certain things, but we're forced to for our sake, for the sake of the community, the class struggle, and for our children and our children's children. Go ahead, Jorge.
No, Nelson Dennis, the author who wrote the book War on All Puerto Ricans. He goes into talking about that belong his father in the 50s, the FBI came to his house too and dragged his father out the house and sent him back to Cuba
Oh,
simply because he came from Cuba, so he was a communist. So they sent him back, and Dennis grew up without a father.
yeah.
So that was happening a lot, man, in the 50s. That was
And you,
happening a lot in the
and you know
50s.
what, Comrade Elder Jorge, you got a good point because guess what? That still happens to this day. I know
That still happens today.
there's a lot of like undocumented comrades, a lot of indigenous comrades that a couple of years ago at the height of the Trump regime, they didn't want to do a lot of activism stuff. So they would be like, we'll make food for y'all, we'll do the science, but we don't want to be in the protests, we don't want to be in the marches. And like I respected that, but I remember just having an honest conversation with one of the hermanas And I told her, I was like, hermana, but you know, you speak a lot better than me. You're more eloquent. You can address the masses. And she said, yeah, but the problem is that with technology, if I have a picture or a video and it's posted online, they could use facial recognition and they could come and deport me. So what was happening back then is still happening now.
It's still happening now.
Still
Yeah.
happening now.
I mean, look what happened with the Black Panthers. You know,
Mm,
as an example, that I mean, it wasn't the Communist Party, but it was the Panther Party. And if you look at the Panther Party and you look at the Young Law Party, very deeply, the Communist parties. You
mm.
know, they're Communist parties. So when they were invaded by the FBI and a lot of Panthers were killed, that's where they were being killed for who they were.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I've had a conversation with High Thurman and I'm sure you all would agree to this, but we're firm believers that one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that Chairman Fred Hampton Sr. was taken out is because he was able to unite all the masses through the class struggle.
Exactly,
Poor
exactly,
white Southerners, Puerto Ricanos with the young lords, you know, later on with us at the break, like to get
exactly.
everybody together in a revolutionary means like that. The comrade was well before his time. He was the epitome of revolutionary, and I firmly believe that's one of the reasons why they took him out.
And that's one of the reasons why the Panther Party was raided and attacked so heavily, because they were organizing people. I mean, they were organizing. You know, there was thousands and thousands of people all over the country, as well as outside of the country. They had White Panthers in Europe.
That's right. That's
They
right.
had White Panthers in Europe. So you can imagine.
And you know what's so crazy is in terms of our Panther brethren, like what was it doing that was so wrong? Let me guess. They were feeding young kids. The free breakfast program. They were doing community patrols because even to this day, the black man or woman, they're expendable in terms of police force. The cops shoot them. Like, so, you know, they would go on patrol. So like,
Yeah,
I don't understand why they were so persecuted, other than the fact that the state did not like that because they did not subdue to the will of the state. They were like, no, man, we're going to take care of our own. We're going to feed the little kids of all colors and ethnicities. We're going to monitor our own neighborhoods, and no cop is going to be able to kill, harass, or abuse any of our people. Like that is the righteous revolutionary thing to do out of love, el amor. And just because of that, the state already had an issue, and then you get somebody like Chairman Fred Hampton Sr. that was able to do that on a mass level with different kinds of people. Oh yeah, he it was
you know,
unfortunate.
when I was in the Dominican Republic, man, I used to see the kids, man, being fed in school. And I told I told my granddaughter, I said, you know who started that? She said, who? I said, the Black Panther Party in New York, in the United States. They started feeding kids, man, because,
Yep,
you know, prior to that, kids were starving,
yep,
going to school starving. If it wasn't for the Black Panther Party who started that program, you know. So she said, really?
yep. I'll even take it a step further. Nowadays we have what is it, WIC, Women with Infants and Children, which is more of like a governmental program, but that wouldn't have come to fruition if it wasn't for things like the free breakfast program from our
Exactly.
from our Black Panther brethren. Like, so
Yeah.
you know, it's just crazy to me to think that just doing the basic necessary things for you and your people is seemed revolutionary. Where in other countries, like that's the basic norm. Everybody gets free healthcare. You know, I know there were comrades um, that went to Ghana recently in Africa, and there's video where they were just so happy to see young children walk home from school. A bunch of them, nobody was bothering them. Sometimes they would walk by street vendors, they'd give them free food or whatever because they were children. And I remember thinking, God, man, that's so beautiful because many moons ago you could do that here in the US. There's no way in hell I'd let my kids just walk in the streets and do whatever.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a different time. And then not only is it a different time, that capitalist regime, the imperialist regime, in my opinion, makes things harder. They magnify and intensify things instead of making it easier. You know,
Yeah.
we have billion-dollar war machines, the machines of death, where if we just had free healthcare, to hell with a trillion-dollar bomber, give everybody free health. Just that alone, most revolutionary people, whether they're young lords, Black Panthers, Brown Berets, even the American Indian movement, that's one of their striving goals is equitable healthcare for their people. And
We
imagine,
are we are living in the most richest country in the world.
yeah,
The most richest. Will you believe it? If this government was to take $1 million and distribute it amongst all the people here in this country, give everybody in this country $1 million, they would still have money.
yeah, yeah, it still has stuff left over. I mean, gosh, it just, and then it
They
just,
make money just like that in a minute. In a
yeah,
machine, they make money like that.
100%, 100%. And the preface of the Second Rainbow Coalition, when it starts with this was built on a white supremacy, slavery, capitalism, it's true. Because if that wasn't true, then just like what you said, Comrade Elder Jorge, why haven't they done that? Why haven't they given the residents a living wage? There's places in Europe where you're paid by the government just a living wage, just because you live in whatever country. They give you a little bit of money just to help maintain whatever lifestyle you want to keep. And then there's others that have the best of the best healthcare. Look at Canada. If you know any Canadians, talk to them. That myth about long waiting periods and having to wait months, that's not the case. They get everything they want. Everything is free. Like, so if there's other countries that are able to model and show sustainability in things that we have to fight for, like free healthcare, why the hell can't we do it? And it's because of that preface of the Second Rainbow Coalition Statement of Unity. It's 100% true how this country was founded.
Yeah.
Right? Did you want to have? Do you have something to say about that, Comrade Elder Andy? Because man, you always drop those knowledge bombs.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting on to show my mute or my other, so you might hear me groaning over here. But I do think that one of the things that we have to fully understand what happened in the 50s and how Fred Hampton was plotted against and killed. You do have to go back to the era that Paul Robeson came from, which goes back to the 30s and the 40s. And at one time, there was a communist party in this country that was integrated, and it had Puerto Rican members and Mexican members and uh, Black members. If you ever seen some of the movies from that era, uh, they touch on that, like Grapes of Wrath, and uh, there was a whole movement during the Depression that was organized a lot by the Communist Party. Now, what happened in the 50s after World War II, where the communists had aligned with Roosevelt in this alliance against fascism, after they were done with that period, the capitalists turned on the communists, and they attacked them with the McCarthy era. And so what the revisionist communists did in response was not to organize and fight, because they were a lot populated by like your movie stars and your Hollywood writers and more middle class people. What the Communist Party did was kick out the Black comrades. You're not going to believe it, but that's what they did. They had a Negro National Labor Conference that was bigger than the whole CPUSA. It was bigger than the Communist Party, but because of the pressure under McCarthy, they folded and they dispelled the Negro National Labor Council. And that was made up of veterans of World War II, Black veterans of World War II, and Black veterans of the Spanish Civil War. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade was fully integrated. A lot of World War II Black soldiers had to fight tooth and nail down in the South. A lot of them were murdered and lynched after World War II. So the history that preceded the arrival of the Rainbow Coalition, people in my generation and Aaron's generation and High's generation, that's already, you're talking 55 years ago, but that we had no organization to model or to depend on or to look to. The black people in the South Side of Chicago. I remember this one guy. He was like 80 years old. He was still running a newsstand, and I used to go and see him every week and give him these papers, and he would sell them, and he would take a cut and give me a little money. And he said to me, I remember the communists, they were the ones who, when we got evicted, they would take our stuff and march it right back into the house, and they would stand guard over our house. And so the people in the United States of all nationalities, all working class people, a lot of them had an admiration for communism. It wasn't until after World War II, when the capitalists attacked through the McCarthy period, and that the weakness of the so-called Communist Party at that time drove out the black population. So there was a precedent, in a way you could say, to the Rainbow Coalition. It was not entirely fulfilled. It never has been, but that's why we're here now, because we're trying to do basically the same thing, is unite this big ass working class that don't understand its own interests. And well, it's a tremendous job, but it does have a longer history. And that's the only thing I wanted to express.
No,
You
thank you
said,
for that,
and
comrade.
you
You
and
know,
you said a lot. And you said a
yeah,
lot.
and you bring up a really good point, comrade Elder. Let me ask you this. If you look at time frames, right, and you look at the 1950s McCarthyism, it's a shame that the communists on the states, how they folded and what they did to our black comrades. I'm trying to understand the why, and I have a theory, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this theory, and Comrade Jorge's. If you look at what was happening in the 50s, what was happening after World War II, because a lot of people don't realize the Russians, a lot of communist countries, they were our allies in World War II. I think what happened after we dropped a bomb on Hiroshima is you have the arms race.
And
And who
Nagasaki.
were the first people to put a satellite in space? It was the Russians. It was Sputnik. Who were the first people to develop a very highly potent bomb? And it was called the Tsar Bomba, and that were the Russians. Um, who was the first people in terms of the space race to put a mammal out in space? We did a chimp. I think the Russian space agency did a dog or something like that. But they were the first ones to put a satellite. They were the first one to put a living mammal in space so that they can also put cosmonauts out in space. So Russian technology has always had us beat. And I've always had this wondering theory that if you look at time frames, when all that McCarthyism BS was happening, the Russians were on their A game in terms of technology. And the US was lacking. Matter of fact, because of Operation Paperclip, the only reason why we went to the moon is because we took in Nazi scientists from World War II. And
That's
we
right.
gave them citizenship, and we made them work in our nuclear space program. They were astronauts at NASA. We didn't even have our own people to come up with mathematical figures in terms of rocket propulsion and all that. So I often wonder if it wasn't that mentality of I'm the big boy in the block and I'm the only big boy in the block and I can't have another big boy in the block. And then I also wonder if that didn't have anything to do with it because they were our allies in World War II. I understand in terms of like political ideology and in terms of military strategy, we shifted in the 50s, but not only did you have McCarthyism, you had Sputnik, you had all these technological advances that I wonder if the US was like, man, we can't keep facing our own constituents, our own people with, well, we'll get there. We got to be up on our A game. I wonder if that had something to do with it. How do you two feel about that?
Well, there's a lot. There's, after World War II, that the United States attacked Russia, man, and the McCarthy period, man. All that contributed, man, to instilling fear in people.
The Red Scare, right?
Yeah, the Red Scare.
Mm.
It's like they started talking about communism like it was like hell. Fear communism, man. They're gonna take everything that you got, and you ain't gonna have nothing. That was their scheme. Fear communism because they'll come to your house, they'll take your spoons, your dishes, your plates, your house, your keys, everything. That was fear. And for many years, for the last 30-some years, the United States has feared communism. And it just up until recently with the Panthers and the civil rights movement that everything just came back to a fold. People started looking at it a little different. And the Squires has kept today, there was a survey not too long ago where most youth love communism.
Yeah, amen to that.
Most youth today love communism because they see the benefits from communism. They compare the benefits of capitalism, which is nothing. There's no benefits in capitalism. And then they look at communism and they see the benefits. And as Squires has kept, there's some social programs instilled within the United States government right now that are communist orientated. Social services is one of them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think Brother Che's right about that. It's like the fear that they paid for that fear to be instilled in the working class of this country. The thing was, it was backed up by a rise in the standard of living that was unprecedented. And the thing was that they could do it here. They could bribe a certain section of the American working class. The rest of the world was in ruins. All of Europe, Russia, Russia lost 50 million to 70 million people during World War II. The US was relatively unscathed.
That's
so
right.
when the GIs came back, everything was discriminatory. They gave the white GIs the GI Bill. The black GIs didn't get the GI Bill. And so they weren't able to build houses and get a stake, but they paid for the anti-communism. They reinforced the anti-communism by saying, look how good you got it. And they also tried to crush the union movement, and a lot of the union leaders became anti-communists, like Walter Reuther and some of the other corrupt individuals. So the communists became the pariah to blame everything on. And it was obvious a lie in order to extend US power in the world, US imperialist power, that you're right, they want to be the only big dog. And they were willing to pay for it through bribing people. They were willing to pay for it by assassinating people. During that whole period, they assassinated, I think, I don't know how many heads of state, elected people they killed in Iran, and I think in Guatemala, in Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. They attempted to invade Cuba. That was only 15 years after the end of World War II. They're trying, invade Cuba. Sister Anna, I went out and got that book about the Bay of Pigs. It's amazing. And their arrogance is exactly the same today. They screwed up so many times trying to invade Cuba, and they never got close. The people rallied around the revolution, but
Right.
these people are so arrogant. They treated the Cubans like crap. Treated the Cubans that they expected to be their forces. They treated them like crap. The US imperialists are just amazingly arrogant. And you're right, they brought over a hell of a lot of Nazis to help them do this. And they're funding Nazis all over the world right now. So there's not a lot has changed in terms of their game plan.
You're
And,
right,
and,
comrade.
and to talk about the Cubans, a part of Florida is owned by Cubans. You
Oh, yeah.
know, a part of it, and it's right-wing Cubans, man. You
Mhm.
can't talk about Castro in a good tone. You got to talk about Castro in a bad tone, or else, man, you get killed. That's the bottom line. You want
That's right.
somebody to wind up going to your house at night and kill you. You know, and,
Right.
That's
and, and,
right.
and who was it that was in the Socialist Party, man, in the 50s, man? What was his name? Oh man, he ran for president too, and he got a lot of votes. What was his name? I forgot his name.
Wallace,
No.
Henry Wallace, not George.
Socialist.
No.
He was in the Socialist Party, I think.
Oh, well, Debs, that was a long
Debs,
time ago.
Eugene
That was a
Debs,
long time ago. Yeah. Yeah,
Eugene
he
Debs.
did. He got a 500,000 votes
A
in
half a million
Holy
people,
1914.
moly.
man. Yeah, and he was making a lot of changes. He was, and plus, you know what? Really was what killed the United States? The Vietnam War. That really blew their mind, because the Vietnam War really exposed the United States for what they are.
Yeah, yeah.
I agree. On the Mexican side of my family, I have a lot of well, they're older now, but a lot of older like tios, uncles that either served in Vietnam or were the surviving part of like a bunch of brothers that passed away. And then they were the like survivors that were left behind because maybe they didn't get drafted or whatever. And then I even have an uncle that was a musician that, went into Mexico and drafted a little bit and then came back and then was even an advocate for some of the vets, because even some of the people that got drafted when they came back, they got shitted on. And then even the draft dodgers got shitted on. And then I had an uncle that did go across, and I remember just hearing the stories on Agent Orange, uh, just hearing about how they were spraying it everywhere. It was getting all over equipment, getting all over people, and they were simply just trying to deforest the jungle to expose the enemy. And I was like, well, that sounds like chemical warfare.
Yeah.
How the hell did the US not go to a war tribunal at the UN for war crimes? The Geneva Convention says it prohibits conventional chemical warfare. And we were the first to use it in Nagasaki, World War II, in terms of atom bombs. We were the first to use it in Vietnam in terms of chemical stuff, Agent Orange. Like, we've always been the first in terms of war crimes, not really socialist countries. And then I often hear from some people that, it sounds good on paper, right? La socialistas, it sounds good, but not one has been successful. And I always fire back with, well, the ones that aren't successful, name the countries. And then those countries you name, tell me when the United States has not been involved.
And you know something? What we don't talk about a lot is that during the Vietnam War, a lot of people refused to go.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people that refused to go. A lot of people were going to Canada as a result. And a lot of people got arrested because they refused to go. There was thousands and thousands of people that didn't want to fight.
Right.
And I mean, we talk about the people that go, but we need to, go focus in on the people that didn't go. Right. What happened to them? And what was the consequences to that? I mean, it's crazy.
Crazy times. All right, Carmen, thank you for your input. Let's go ahead and continue.
Yeah,
Y'all should still be able to see my screen. So, man, that
yeah.
just hit me when he saw the man there in two suits. So then it says, Poppy had been a Paul. Poppy had been a part of Paul Robeson's youth security contingent when Robeson had appeared at Soldier Field in Chicago in the 1940s. Paul Robeson was an almost mythic figure in Black American history. A two-time All-American football player, he graduated from Columbia Law School, played professional football, then went on to become a world-renowned, highly paid stage actor and singer. He toured the world as a performer and as an ambassador of social justice, and his speeches packed Soldier Field in Chicago during the 1940s. Committed to justice for all working people, Robeson joined the Communist Party, which led to his being blacklisted and banned from international travel, and many recordings of his performances and speeches were destroyed. After returning from war, it's funny because they did the same thing to Nina Simone. After returning from the war, Poppy, inspired by Robeson, had attended some Communist Party meetings in an effort to try to understand what had happened to him and others in the Deep South. Wow, that's so crazy. We were just talking about that. There was another incident of savage racism that affected Poppy deeply. In August 1955, Emmett Till, oh man, a 14-year-old black teenager from Chicago was visiting relatives in Mississippi. He made the fatal mistake of speaking to a white woman who is still alive and actually has a warrant out for her arrest, just FYI. That night, a truckload of white men abducted him from his uncle's home and took him down the river where they tortured and brutally beat him to death. His mother had the courage to leave his casket open during the funeral in Chicago. The pictures of little Emmett Till's tortured body were seen by millions of Black Americans, thanks to the work of Jet Magazine and other Black publications. Finally, the terror of the Jim Crow South was exposed to the world. The murder of Emmett Till had a profound effect on Poppy. Jesus. It brought back a flood of memories of his personal experiences in Mississippi, and he laid bare the hypocrisy of the United States. In response to this tragic murder, Poppy wrote this poem. Deep in the heart of Dixie, where the cotton blooms in June, an old black man tills the field, humming a sad tune. His heart was heavy, his eyes were full, his body aching and sore. I wish I was dead, I wish I was dead. My heart can't take no more. They took a little Negro boy and chopped and smashed his eye. They tormented, teased, and cut him up just to make him die. They tore off an ear when he shred a tear, and they beat him in the face. Each mark and scar was symbolic of suffering by the Negro race. They threw him in the river, his hands and legs all bound, hoping that his body would never be found. The river current surged and splashed to free its mangled prey, but it didn't matter anymore, for it was Emmett's judgment day. The two white men who did these things are free to lynch and kill. Now, my God, I pray to you, avenge poor Emmett Till. The hate and evil in this world is something sad to see. Why, oh Lord, do they hate us so? Why can't we all be free? The children played on the courtroom floor. The grown-ups drank cold beer. They laughed and joked and enjoyed themselves like they had no God to fear. I'll never forget you, Emmett Till, and how you horribly died. I'll never forget the smiling jurors and how the lawyers lied. Well, Emmett's gone, ain't nothing to do but push this white man's plow. I guess little Emmett's made his peace because he's with his father now. Elmer J. Dixon Jr., Chicago, Illinois, October 1955. Poppy never spoke of this horrific crime again, but his poem was always there for us kids as a reminder of what horrible injustice Black people faced and still face in America. By the time I was 10 years old, I had memorized this poem and often took it to school to share with others. Wow, Jesus. In 1957, my father received job offers in Spain, Alabama, and a place called Seattle. I was hoping he would choose Spain, but to my dismay, he chose Seattle, somewhere far away in the northwestern part of the country. It's about 3 hours north of where I'm at. At first, I felt excitement at the thought of traveling to a distant place and the possibilities of experiencing new things and meeting new people. When it sank in that I would be leaving the only place I had known as home, this safe haven of family and friendly Black faces, I was devastated. I would have to leave all my friends, peculiar old Mrs. Naylor, and the security of Birch Village. Most of all, I would miss the trips to Chicago to visit with Ma and Bop Bop and Dee Dee and Granddada, as well as my cousins and other relatives scattered throughout the Chicago South Side. I would miss the family barbecues when Granddada would cook his Kentucky style barbecue ribs with a strong accent on vinegar. He would wrestle with his kids, letting us ride on his large back and broad shoulders before tickling us to death. On hot nights, we sat on his lap while he smoked his pipe or played his harmonica, rubbing his rough, tickly whiskers against our soft brown faces. I would miss watching Bop Bop come home from work at the post office, dressed neatly in a suit and tie, bringing us bus transfers to use as play money. He would go quietly upstairs to change, come down with his Bible and Christian Science monitor, sit quietly on the corner of the black leather sofa, put his spectacles on over his serious face, and silently read. This was his way of keeping at bay the demons of alcoholism, which he had soundly defeated many years earlier. I would miss my grandmother Dee Dee, who always reminisced about the old days, sharing stories of her family, demonstrating the Charleston, my father's sister, and Doris, my cousins, Mark and Keith, and Ma, dressing us like prissy rich kids, greasing our faces with Vaseline, feeding us non-dried food and wheat bread, and constantly reciting from the Bible. My grandparents represented everything that we were and hoped to be. Now, we sadly had to leave them behind, and I remember Granddada standing with his bug eyes and thick eyelashes, his stomach bulging over his brown trousers. Dee Dee stood next to him in the brown flowered dress that she often wore on hot, muggy days. Have a safe trip, and brother, you be careful, you hear. Dee Dee always affectionately referred to her son as brother. We drove off slowly, with us kids looking out the back window at the two figures standing on the green lawn looking back at us. I would never forget that image. It took me many years to forgive my parents for taking us out of this haven of comfort. I carried a lot of anger for a long time, not really understanding or caring why. I never quite felt that security, that contentment, that familiarity again. Man, man. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the chapter. Man, that was pretty heavy. It's interesting because in terms of class struggle, specifically for people of color, there's always been migration periods. Matter of fact, any kind of person of color, because even in the Dust Bowl Depression era of the 20s, you had a lot of poor white people that went to Oklahoma, right? Um, in terms of like mine workers and stuff like that in the 30s and 40s. Again, a lot of poor white people in the Appalachian area in the South. I know with my family, like in the 50s and 60s, there was a movement from on the Mexican side, anyways, from Texas to California because of the lack of jobs. Right. My grandfather, who helped raise me, was a World War II vet and born and raised in Texas in a little city of a Spanish surname, and everybody knows the history of Texas, that it used to be part of Mexico at one point. He couldn't get a job there as a vet. And I remember the only job he could get was in California. And so literally there was a split on the Mexican side of my family of some of the original quote unquote Tejanos staying in Texas. And then with my family's last name, Villalobos, Castillo, Cordova, then we all saw family in California. So anybody with Cordova with a B or Villalobos or Castillo in California that are Mexicans usually have a connection to on the Texas side. And it's simply because of the class struggle. And I remember going off of some of the previous scenes we were talking about, I remember as a younger man trying to understand my Venezuelan roots, because it wasn't until recently when they left Venezuela, I was able to make contact with them. And I remember my grandfather never had a mean thing to say. He never had anything bad to say about communists. And remember, he was a World War II vet and then a Korean War vet in the 50s. And I remember he always told me that if there could ever be a change in this nation's government, he often thought of Las Socialistas, right? Because it made such an impression on him in his era, in his generation, the World War II comrades and the Bay of Pigs, which like Brother Che, Comrade Elder Jorge was saying, was a movement of the people, by the people, for the people. Yes, Fidel Castro was kind of like their leader, so to speak, but he didn't come to power just overnight. It was the people that brought him to power. And that being said, Ralphie, our hermano Rafa can correct me if I'm wrong. We found out that the U.S. had attempted 600 or 700 times, something crazy, trying to assassinate Fidel Castro, and it could never come to fruition because of the will of the people. They always had his back. They just couldn't take him out. And when I look at countries that have tried socialism or communism or whatever that have failed, oftentimes I always see the U.S. is involved. In Venezuela, it's the oil. That's the third largest OPEC producing country. And black and brown communists are there? Oh, hell no. What's happening in Venezuela now is they're trying a form of currency terrorism. So the national currency of Venezuela is the Bolivar, which is named after Simon Bolivar, who was one of the original socialist revolutionaries of back in like in the 1900s, right? Late 1800s. So that's the Bolivar. That's like their dollar. But now the Bolivar is devaluating. And now the American dollar is actually being used in Venezuela, and it's overtaking the Bolivar. And that is what is ruining the country in terms of economy. And that is what is pushing people out. And I remember it wasn't until my father and some of his family in Miami told me, I was like, well, how is that even possible? Like, we're the ones that close all the embassies. And I know the Venezuelans really don't like the Yankees, the Americans. How the hell did we get our money down there? And they said it was easy. The narco cultura from Mexico that infiltrated Colombia, there's tons of money there. And then all of a sudden, we saw the money coming into the States. And of course, there's no proof on this, but it's funny how some family members that I have a theory that if it wasn't the CIA or the FBI, somebody is bringing all that money in, just like the CIA and the FBI were funding crack back in the 80s and 90s that affected black and brown communities.
Exactly.
Exactly, right, Jorge?
In Nicaragua, in the Nicaragua,
Yep.
during
They
the
mentioned that
Nicaragua
too.
War, where the who was it? The some group was
The
bringing in,
Sandinistas.
huh?
The Sandinistas.
Yes, they were bringing in drugs, man, to this country, you know, and also providing financing the counter the contras over there in Nicaragua,
Yeah.
you know. But unfortunately, they wasn't able. They wasn't that successful.
And then you had idiots like Oliver North blowing the whistle.
Yeah.
And if you look in the comments, Camarada Rafi has a good point. He said they did the same thing in Cuba, where they undermined the economy as a way to turn the people against the leaders. Iran-Contra scandal under Reagan. That's right. That's right. And it's funny because Reagan was the same idiot that, if you look at history, 1960s, the Mulford Act in California, when the Black Panthers opened carry, he didn't like that. And then in the 80s, in terms of the crack cocaine epidemic that hit in black and brown communities, what happened? There was the DARE program, right? Say no to drugs and all that. And yet you had things like Oliver North and the Contras. And then come to find out the CIA was flying crack out of South America. Like, these poor socialist countries, they're not going to be able to afford a C-130 Hercules full of crack. Like, it was our own government doing that. And then it just makes me wonder why? 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 Again, when people say, oh, it's never worked, well, name me the country that you're particularly talking about, and I can tell you why it hasn't worked in terms of American involvement. If they would just leave those countries alone, they probably would have worked. I don't know, just my opinion.
You know, I'll say a friend. I had a friend in Florida. He was Cuban, and the reason why he became my friend, I'm gonna tell you. I used to argue with him all the time because he used to say, "Oh, Castro, man, he's controlling this country and he got all these people on this." I said, "Well, listen, let me ask you something, man. Let me ask you something. How could one man control everybody like that, in the masses of people in Cuba. How could they? And we used to argue and argue and argue and argue until one day he finally submitted. And he said, listen, the reason, the reason why I'm so hard on Castro is because my family tells me to be like that. My family have taught me since I was a kid, that Castro, because remember, most of the Cubans that left Cuba, they were rich.
They were rich. That's right.
They were
That's right. They were
rich,
already
man.
business owners and landlords.
And,
That's right.
and I won't say Castro, I'll say the government, the communist government took everything they had, all the means of production. Because remember, when we talk about power to the people and we want revolution, we talk about, man, we talk about controlling the means of production. And that's what they did. They took all the means of production in Cuba and controlled it and threw all the rich people out of the country. And they came over here, to become rich. And right now, part of Florida, Miami is a good example. Miami is full of drugs. Miami is full of drugs. The big drug addicts, man, walking with tight with suits on. You say, wow, that's a respectable person. Yeah, right, sure. That's a drug pusher. That's what he is, And so I was able to convince him eventually, man. And he said, that's the reason why, because my family used to tell me, he said, never talk good about Castro, never talk good about communism. Communism is bad. Because they came to this country, man. Everything was taken from them. And so it's only natural for them to well, I mean, it's not natural, but it's only right for them to advocate what they advocated, man, because they came from a country that was run by the mafia. Castro, prior to Castro, Cuba was run by the mafia,
That's
man.
right. That's right. The Italian
The
mafia.
mafia
That's right.
ran Castro. I mean, the mafias used to go to Cuba, man, and have heyday, man.
Right.
Drugs all over the place, man. And the squads just kept, we don't watch Puerto Rico and we don't watch Mexico, it's gonna become the same way, man.
Yep.
I
agree.
told Connie the other day, I said, listen, sister, let me ask you a question. Do you think that Mexico is colonized by the United States? And she said, I don't know. It might. And do you know, Brother Lobo, they are?
Yeah. 100%.
Mexico is colonized by the United States. It
100%.
appears on the surface as if they're not. It appears. But if they don't, it just like Dominican Republic, it's colonized. And a lot of, and Puerto Rico, look at Puerto Rico. I mean, Puerto Rico been colonized for the last 200 years.
Right. It's interesting because you bring up a good point, Comrade Elder Che. You bring up a good point, Jorge, because like for me, not to spill my age or whatever, but I left Texas in the 90s. I left Texas in the 90s. And if you remember in the 90s, you had Clinton in office, Bill, and you had something called NAFTA, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Act. Now, growing up, being born and raised there, even though I was half Venezolano and half Chicano, being born and raised in El Paso, we used to cross the border all the time. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, literally there was like a railroad crossing, like that was it. Now it's, it's militarized very much so. But we used to cross, we used to, some of my family members would go to church, others would go shopping, and we had a great time. And I remember when I left, NAFTA was coming into play and nobody knew what the hell it was. They were like, free trade? What do you mean free trade? We go there, they buy our stuff, we buy their stuff. I mean, what's so free about it? That was done by a Democrat. When I came back many years later to bury some of the older family members and I saw what was happening, I saw the narcocultura coming. At that time, this was mid 90s, early 2000s. At that time, Juarez had the highest murder capital rate of women in the world. Matter of fact, J-Lo made a movie about it. And I remember thinking, well, what the hell happened? Like it used to be, so what? It was part of Mexico. It used to be a lovely place. The narcocultura came into play. And I remember thinking, did that have anything to do with free trade? Like, I mean, there's always been drugs. Like, why? How did this come into play? And then I had an aunt that worked at a maquiladora, which is like a factory. So she lived in El Paso. She'd cross over and she'd work. And she said that one day they were told that they're being bought out by this company and that this company didn't play by any rules. They were going to figure out how much they were going to get paid, whereas they do actually have a national average, kind of like a minimum wage. And she remembered thinking, well, fuck that. I'm just going to go to the States and find a regular job then, I guess. Like, why is this happening? Come to find out, that company was owned by a big narco cultura family. And come to find out, that family had a bunch of relatives that were politicians all over southern New Mexico, western Texas. So it came in hand in hand. And I was like, damn. And then you're right. They try to act like they're not colonized. But what is an indigenous leader like Manuel Lopez Obrador, who is the current president of Mexico, who is democratically elected? What in the hell is he doing building detention facilities for his own and other native South Americanos? What is, like, just because the United States is doing it, you're going to follow suit? Screw that. They are very much are a puppet in certain terms. I do
Yeah, they
believe
are.
so.
They are definitely a puppet, man. And I just listen to. Sometimes I listen to this to your president, and I'm sorry that I say your president, because he's not your president, you know. But the president of Mexico, and I say, where the fuck is he coming? Where is he coming from?
Yeah.
He makes no. Sometimes his speeches make no sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I compare Manuel Lopez Obrador to Obama, and I'll be the first to admit
Exactly.
that I was like, oh man, the first black president. Oh, well, Republicans, Democrats, but maybe he'll do. No, man, he did everything even worse, if not more damage. He just did it in a very covert way. He was actually known as the deporter in chief. He deported more people than Reagan, Bush, and Trump put together. Can you imagine that? Like, he was very sly about it. And so then I was like, oh, okay, well, something that I always guessed, that the two-party system doesn't work. Now it really doesn't. And I probably should have known that. And I actually think that Lopez Obrador is the same way. He, is an eloquent speaker, but some of the stuff he's doing, I'm like, man, you're just like Obama. We thought you were going to be the one, but you're not. And if you look in the comments, Comrade Elder Andy and Hermano Rafa, they're dropping knowledge. And Comrade Elder Andy says they poured drugs into Watson 65, now threaten Mexico when the U.S. has been caught funding one cartel. That's right. That was actually just recently in the news. The U.S. was caught funding them. And then Ralphie says, Castro will kill you if you try to bring drugs into Cuba. Because he understood free exploitation. AMLO speaks out both sides of his mouth like Obama. Yes, exactly right. And, call it what it is. They're politicians. But if it wasn't for the will of the people like
Bourgeois
Castro,
politicians.
yeah, bourgeois, that's exactly what it is, when we talk about class struggle, it's almost like certain forms of politics and even certain positions of politics are like that. Like, unfortunately, there are some of my family members that made it, but they became landlords, they became capitalists, and I got nothing to do with them, right?
Yeah.
And it almost seems like that's his problem. Like, Lopez Obrador was this indigenous guy. Now he's living in the presidential palace. So now he went from being up here to up there, and he got washed out. Same thing with Obama. He spoke a good game, but he didn't change much, if anything
You
at
know,
all.
when we look at people who had who owns a little land, has a little business, and is making good, that person actually, in actuality, that person may be a mini capitalist, but it's not a full-fledged capitalist. To be a full-fledged capitalist, have to have control of the means of production.
Right.
To be part of
Right.
the ruling class, We find people in our communities that own little houses, and little have little property, have some business, and right away we have a tendency of calling them capitalists, man, but they're not. They're just trying to make it, because in the final analysis, when we talk about competition and capitalism, the big corporations are going to overthrow that little bit business, and they're going to have those little businesses, you know.
You
So
bring up a really good point. It was interesting. There was a movement in Portland, Oregon a couple of years ago, kind of like right when the pandemic was first started, and it was called the Red House Movement. And there was a famous house, and it was red, on Mississippi, North Mississippi, in Portland, in North Portland, in a neighborhood that used to be predominantly Black. Back in World War II, there was a city called Vanport, which was a suburb of Portland, Oregon, that basically through red zoning, all the Black African American comrades were pushed to. But they flourished and they had their own little businesses and so forth. Fast forward, gentrification came in, and there was still a Black family that owned this house on North Mississippi, and it was called the Red House. And something happened that a bank defaulted. They're making their mortgage. Another bank bought them out. And for whatever reason, the two banks were talking, and that other bank had property, and they were into property management, and they were trying to evict these comrades. And they were like, bullshit. We worked hard for this house. We have receipts showing that we have mortgages. We're not leaving anywhere. The police were involved. There were literally armed standoffs. We have mutual aid comrades doing shifts there. And I think it lasted a couple of months, literally people fighting it, right? And then I remember meeting an old Black gentleman that was the first owner of the very first Black nightclub here in Portland. And he had three little units, three little like duplexes. So 6, right? So there were 3 little houses subdivided into 2s. And I remember he was there and he was asking about rental assistance out of his own mouth. And we're talking like a 70, 80-year-old man. He said, I'm hearing that Multnomah County and Portland, Oregon, the city government will actually pay me if my tenants can't make rent because of the pandemic or whatever. How do I give them that information? And how do I get involved with that? And I remember thinking, wow, you're a landlord and you want that information? And he was very honest. He was like, I'm already retired. I have a steady paycheck. This is just play money. If the state or the government or the city or the county, if they're going to pay me, I'm getting money either way. But I don't know about this program, and I'm pretty sure my tenants don't know. Can you give me the information? And I hate to tell you, but at that site where all the protesters were, he was ran off. We're talking a 70, 80-year-old man, Black man, ran off. And they called him everything under the bus, a capitalist. And then here I am trying to be like, well, is he really? Or is that company that's trying to evict this family that owns all these properties the real capitalist? Because even in my own neighborhood, it was once rural. My house is still here. The house next to me is a ranch style older house. And the house next to them was some development company bought that house out. And now there's 4 little houses squished together there. And that property management company is just eating up territory and buying houses left and right. And the owner is some cat back east. And I'm like, that's the capital, is that guy right there, not this 80-year-old Black man that just has like 1 or 2 houses that was asking for assistance for his own tenants, and y'all ran him off. And then once they found out that I was very pro-socialista, they started calling me a tanky and this and that. And I was like, whatever, man. Like, I'm just trying to make sense here of where I'm at in this part of the revolution. But I think you have a good point. We have to keep focus on the bigger targets. The capitalists are the ones that control the police, that have a hand at politics on the local, national level, that can influence, right? Bezos is getting there. Jeff Bezos from Amazon. Yeah, man, talk about a coconut. He's a union buster, right? But the people that work for him control the means of production, the Amazon drivers, the people that work the production lines, and they keep trying to unionize, and every time he keeps shitting on them. Now, if we ever gets into politics and we hear the police showing up at Amazon union meetings or whatever, that's how you know he's becoming a capitalist. He's getting there, definitely getting there. And then he has the arrogancy to ride a rocket ship for 10 minutes that costs what, billions of dollars, and has the audacity to thank his workers. What? Get out of here, man. Get out of here. I can't stand Bezos, but it's funny because when I say he's on the verge of becoming a capitalist, he's also creating means of dependency. If y'all can remember during the pandemic when there was no toilet paper or whatever, my neighbor was getting shipments daily. And I remember asking her, Suli, like, how you doing this? Like, where the hell are you getting it? Like, I'm going to Walmart, I'm going to mom and pop shops. Like, and she goes, oh, Amazon Prime, they have a grocery delivery service. And I was like, shit. You mean I got to sign up for Prime and go to that pig Jeff Bezos and get my shit paper? No way. No way. And it's funny, my wife found a bidet from France that connects to a modern toilet. And so I was like, no, we'll use it. Screw that. It's cleaner anyways. I am not going to Bezos. I just, and that to me is another sign of a capitalist is if they get into politics, control the force, like the prefect said, the state, the oppressive force, the cops, politics and all that, if they start controlling means of dependency, that's a capitalist. Like the Waltons, the founders of Walmart. The dirty little secret is in the 80s and 90s, when they would set up their big box shops or stores, all the small mom and pop stores would fold. Meat markets would fold, little mom and pop vacuum repairmen, sewing places would fold, mini markets would fold because Walmart was a one-stop shop. And then
Yeah.
how do you compete with a big corporate capitalist that's able to be open 24 hours where you're just a mom and pop and you're only open Monday through Friday? You know what I'm saying? Like, so then once the capitalists start controlling the means of dependency, that's another way to recognize that. Sister Anna says, Oscar, let me go up to Rafa. Rafa says, AMLO just allowed Elon Musk into Mexico where Musk will take all the resources. And that's the other thing is Tesla. It's an electric car. It's all great. But what they were doing to Bolivia in the lithium mines was very unethical. But then again, do I want a Tesla or do I want this gasoline hog that's going to pollute the environment? Sister, Comrade Elder Andy says, our model doesn't exist yet, but revolutionary leadership will have to be a collective with accountability to the people only. And to me, that's representation of Cuba. Because if Castro was not an authentic and very productive leader in Cuba, 600-700 times, it would have just taken one and they would have taken him out. Right?
Yeah,
But it was never
they would
successful.
have definitely took
Yeah.
him out. You know, definitely. There's no doubt about that.
And then Sister Anna says,
And just
great
keep in mind that his background. See, he comes from high class background. You know, he don't come from no lumpings.
yeah, that's right.
You know,
He wasn't necessarily what you would call a poor person.
no, but he gave up not only his, but some of his families as well. And that's why one of his sisters, they all ran to the United States.
Right. That's exactly
You
right.
know,
That's
they
exactly
all ran
right.
to the United States because he took away. He did what he was supposed to have done. A real revolutionary. You know, he took all the wealth, all the major wealth, not all of it, you know, little businesses, he kept it. And there's still businesses in Cuba, little businesses, you know, but they don't own the means of production. That's the focus. Owning the means of production. You own the means of production, you own society.
That's exactly it. You know, if you look at history, if you ever read up on Simón Bolivar, he was the liberator of Colombia, Venezuela, a whole bunch of other South American, Latin countries. That's actually why their flag almost looks similar, same colors and all that. Simón Bolivar was born of a wealthy Criollo family from Spain, wealthy, wealthy, wealthy. But it's so funny when you read on his history and his background, his mother owned businesses and land and slaves. His father owned businesses and land and slaves. And they worked so much, they were never present in the home. The people that raised him were the servants, the workers, one of which was a black slave named Hippolyta. And Hippolyta not only raised him, she suckled him, and he called her mom. And when he saw the way that Hippolyta was treated and how the workers were treated, he felt guilty. And that was the number one reason why he became a revolutionary. He was like, I'm born, I'm here in this rich palace, fucking granite, gold sinks and all that, but yet the people are suffering that care about me, that love me, that raise me. How can I comprehend these two things? So then he just thought, well, maybe if they live like I do. And the only way that they can do that is if he gave them the means of production. And his family were like, no, you're not doing that. And his own family tried to take him out one by one. And then after he started gathering all the masses, he liberated Colombia. Then he liberated Venezuela. Then he liberated a whole bunch of other countries. And it's just interesting to see how somebody who was already at that top class can come down just on a humanistic level. And Cuba with Castro, to me, it was the same thing. In the comments, Sister Anna says, great discussion with the read, still with patience. It's kind of hectic. I'm still trying to listen. Thank you, sister. We appreciate you. And then Comrade Elder Andy says, Bezos is a 21st century capitalist. 100%, 100%, 100%. And I try as much as possible to not use Amazon Prime, to try not to be dependent on it, but using the whole issue of like toilet paper back in the pandemic, it's funny to me how sometimes it almost seems like they are controlling the means of dependency. And that to me is another sign of a capitalist, right?
Yeah.
Some 70, 80-year-old black man that has one or two houses that's trying to help his own
No.
tenants. He ain't trying to create any kind of means of dependency. But Jeff Bezos, who makes billions of dollars every freaking minute, oh yeah. Same thing with Microsoft, with that
Walmart.
idiot. Yeah, same thing with Walmart with the Walmart. That type of class, they literally are the 99% because they can
Definitely.
influence the government, they can influence the force, police, the military, and then, but not only that, but once they start controlling the means where you're dependent on them, it almost reminds me of like medieval feudal serfdom. Like in the medieval times, the kings and queens, they'd say, here, live in the castle because we can protect you. But since we're protecting you, you have to pay us a fife. You have to pay us a fee. And
Yeah.
then that was the beginning of capitalism because now you don't just own your means of production. You got to give it to the royalty. And then their claim was, well, you're behind the castle walls. The knights and the guards, they'll protect you, right? It almost seems like that again. Like, damn, I can't even go and buy any toilet paper. I got to go to Amazon Prime, have it delivered at home. Oh, it's convenient. But now I'm a sucker to that, right? Now I'm dependent on that, right? It goes hand in hand. Comrade Elder says Andy says, with Amazon, we can see how it was public property. It would be great. Otherwise, we're toast. And exactly right. They keep trying. They keep trying. There's a famous case back east, or actually, I think it was in Georgia, of some black comrades who were the first to unionize in Amazon. And if you research that case, these comrades went through hell. And this is just a few years ago. And now slowly you're starting to see other Amazon outlets getting unionized. I know in Portland, I know in Seattle, and I know all in between near my neck of the woods. Anybody I talk to, if I see Amazon drivers in the neighborhood or whatever, they'll tell you horror stories, union busting techniques. They'll tell you everything. Managers, line supervisors, just mad dogging them, treating them all kinds of ways. And to
And
me, it's
that
kind of
just
like,
and that's just recent too. It's just
yeah,
recent
it's
stuff,
happening
man.
right now. Yeah, it's happening right now.
You
So,
know,
so to me, it's another sign of Bezos becoming a capitalist because if he wasn't, why wouldn't he let the people unionize to control the means of production? You're still going to get a profit. He's still the owner, like, but it's that arrogant, like Comrade Elder Andy said, it's that arrogance. It's that capitalist, imperialist arrogance. Like I don't know if money just does that to you, but it blinds you. It really does. It just
well,
blinds you,
that's
man.
the base of capitalism. Money.
Money.
Money divides people.
Yeah.
Money divides people. I mean, look at poor people fighting over money, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody gets a higher salary and somebody don't get the higher salary, they're in trouble. They're gonna fight, they're gonna argue.
Yeah.
You was my friend, now you got a higher salary. I got a friend who just recently started working with my wife because my wife cleans different companies. She's a cleaner. You know, so she, as a matter of fact, she's working now up until 11:30 tonight. And her friend, were real close friends. And so she came to, my wife referred her to the job, and she got the job. But guess what? She became her manager. Will you believe it? As soon as she became a manager, it popped something up in her head. She thought she was somebody because she wasn't nobody. She wasn't getting no higher salary. But because of the position of her being a manager and managing people, that made her feel like importance, you know? And that's what capitalism does, man. Capitalism divides people, man.
100%. 100%. You know, there's an old political cartoon, and I forget who drew it, but it's from like 40s, 50s, maybe 60s. And it shows like a whole bunch of people at the table, right? And it shows this elephant in a three-piece suit. And he's saying to these workers, you see a guy that looks like a construction worker, a guy that looks like a mine uh, worker, and somebody else that looks like a welder or whatever. And this elephant who represents capitalists, he says, "Hey man, don't let this immigrant take your wages in." And then you see the workers going after this brown-looking comrade like they want to kick his ass, and he's sitting there just grinning, laughing because he's the one that's raking all the profit in. And you're 100% right. You know, to use a Christian saying, not that I'm a Christian by any means, but you know, it is what it is. I really do believe that money is the root of all evil, because
It
through
is. It
money,
is.
capitalism is able to manifest, right?
It
If we
is.
weren't able to take that money out, capitalism wouldn't be able to survive.
Nah.
Capitalism to money is like cancer to a cell. If it wasn't for that cell, cancer couldn't flourish. And
Yeah.
money is that cell that capitalism just goes in and just rots and flourishes.
And it divides people, man, and
Divides us.
made people fight against each other, man. I remember when I was a kid, man. You know, people used to tell me about immigrants, man, and I said, yeah, man, they, you know, and I was so blind. You said, yeah, immigrants coming to this country and taking everything that we got, you know, and then in '59, I was like, what? I was like 12 years old. Yeah, 12, 11 or 12. In '59, when Castro took over, people were saying, Castro, that communist. I said, yep. Now you know he gonna kill everybody in Cuba. I was so dumb at that time. I said, no, yeah, he's a dictator. He's gonna kill everybody in Cuba. I didn't see no. The only people I saw get killed was the people who were traitors,
Right.
you know, and people who were oppressors. They were put up against the wall. I would have done the same thing too. I would have put them against the wall and killed them. You know, Batista, especially Batista. If I would have caught up with Batista, I would have killed him myself.
But you know what's funny? You bring up a good point in terms of evil socialist dictators. Look at Gaddafi. He was getting his country off of the dependency of the US dollar. He gave everybody free healthcare. You know, his people, tribally speaking, are Bedouins. So they live in tents, really fancy tents. He would have gold brick bars delivered to everybody's tent once a month. Gold, oil, all the resources were for the people first, and then they exported out. And then look at what Hillary Clinton did, had him whacked. Look at Fidel Castro, who came from kind of an affluent family,
And
right?
Obama was behind that too,
And
man.
Obama was behind that too. And then in terms of history, look at Simon Bolivar, who was already born in the wealth. That to me is the only way that I can see people trying to flip capitalism and the use of money on its head is when they give it back to the people. But if you look at history, it's not successful because of US intervention. They took out Gaddafi. They've been trying to take out Castro for 6, 7, 800 times. They couldn't. And then he thankfully died of just old age or whatever. And what's interesting is just recently, I gosh, I want to say it was
And
about
they're
2 weeks
trying
ago.
to they're trying to get my man out, man, from Venezuela.
That's exactly right, Maduro. And what's interesting is about 2 weeks ago, about a week or two ago, my family in Miami, they sent me this news clip, and it's old, and it's Maduro back in the like early 2000s, right when Hugo Chavez had just passed away. And he said, I have doctors. They're the best doctors from Cuba. And they're from the white coat brigade. So what a lot of people don't know is these evil socialists in Cuba, they will fly in their own doctors and they will help cure any disease for free in any country that they're welcomed. And that's called the white coat brigade. They literally fly them, airdrop them, and you see all these doctors in these white coats trying to feed people, trying to help with illnesses or whatever. And in this video, Maduro was saying, I have these doctors from Cuba. They're the best of the best of the best. And they're telling me that this highly addictive and destructive form of cancer that Hugo Chavez died of is very rare. Like less than 0.5% of the world's population has it. And in the video, he says, if we ever find out that the US government had something to do with his cancer, we're immediately calling a declaration of war and we're going right to the UN. And I remember seeing that video like, holy shit, I've never seen this video in my life. Creepy. Like, are they alluding to maybe he was assassinated through a weird form of cancer? And I remember my familia was like, who knows?
I think
With technology now, who knows, man?
I think he was. I think he was, man. And they're trying to assassinate Maduro now, but they can't, man, because he has too much. It's just like Castro, man. He has too many people behind him.
See, that's the thing. If it didn't work, the people, you can think you're doing right. You can think you have the will of the people, but if you don't, they're going to give you up. If it didn't work, the people would not be protective. And just like Cuba, my hopes is, that they're protected or whatever. Rafi has a good point. He says, now Clinton's actions with Obama, there's slavery and Libya and instability. That's right. Now, because of what Democrat American imperialists have done, Libya has a lot of human slavery, and that's right. And there's a lot of instability. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, well, Gaddafi was trying to do something good for his people in terms of a North African socialist movement. Fidel trying to do good for his people in terms of a Caribbean socialist movement. So then, to me, it just goes to prove my point. Nicaragua también, it just goes to prove my point. Show me a country where there has not been any kind of intervention whatsoever from the US, and I'll show you that it has not thrived or flourished because of that. So you can't really shit on the whole socialist idea because it hasn't thrived or anything. It's because what we're doing. We either have foreign policies that are destructive, we're trying to influence their national currency, which is destructive, or outright trying to kill them like we did Gaddafi, or try to like we did Castro.
Well, that goes way back to the article we was reading, man, about the Communist Party. Anybody that stands against the United States, whether or not they're communists, they are considered communists.
Right.
If you're against the United States today, they don't even call it communist. They call it a terrorist.
Right.
You're a terrorist. But a terrorist and a communist is like it's like, it goes the same way. They called a lot of Panthers terrorists, and they called a lot of young law terrorists and organizations in Puerto Rico, that were doing, were supposed to be doing, they were being called terrorists, right. And so, if you talk bad about the United States, you're automatically considered a terrorist or a communist. And it's the same thing when I was in prison, man. When I was in prison, every time I was organizing people, I was considered a terrorist. They picked me up, throw me in segregation for a month or two, and they thought that they would do something with that, but they never were able to break my spirit. They were always attempting to break my spirit, and they almost came to the point of killing me. The Attica situation was I'm supposed to have been dead, but by some, I don't believe in God, but by some grace, I was able to make it to the point today where I could talk about it. A lot of my brothers didn't make it, man.
Right. What year was Attica, comrade?
Huh?
70. What year was that? What year?
That was 71.
72. Oh, 71.
Yeah.
71. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At September 13, that's when the massacre. September 9th is when we took over the prison.
Damn. We're gonna have to do another Zoom on that because I recently saw a documentary on that, and man, those couple of days, like, woo wee. I mean, that was revolutionary because again, what were y'all asking for? Like decent food, right? Uh, what were some of
Did
the
you
things
see
that?
the interview that I made with Connie?
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's just interesting to me how we could be labeled as terrorists for wanting what? Adequate food, healthcare, housing, like all the human rights that other countries get, but class people, people of color have to fight for. And just because we have to fight for that little piece, the capitalists and the imperialists label us as terrorists
You
because we
know,
won't succumb
this
to
is
what they
my
want.
position. My position is this: we fighting for the same thing that the United States came to this country to fight against Britain. They
That's
came to this
right.
country to fight Britain for what? For freedom. We fighting for the same right, freedom. So if we terrorists, the first terrorists in the United States were the founding fathers who came to this country. They were the first terrorists.
Amen. Amen to that. And it's interesting, Comrade Elder Andy put in the comments here. Chavez told Comrade Sherry Hankala, quote, I don't know who they're going to kill first, me or you. The CIA gives leaders 3 chances to comply, then takes them out. Oh, man. And then Rafa says the U.S. always has to have a quote unquote boogeyman to control the narrative, thus the communist terrorists. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, even communists are called terrorists. People that fight just for basic things are called terrorists. Just some of the certain things that we want are called terrorists. Like for what? Just because we want clean water, just because we want decent healthcare, education, and now we're the terrorists. And you're exactly right, Comrade Jorge. We are, if you think about it, we're the true patriots because that's what the U.S. was fighting for way back when, right?
Yeah, they were fighting for the same thing we fighting for.
But you know,
Actually, we're gonna be the new founding fathers.
and it's so funny because Comrade Andy, Comrade Elder Andy, he had a very valid point, and it's so true. The imperialist capitalists, they are so arrogant, they don't see that in a couple hundred years, what the U.S. was supposedly founded on, they became that evilness that people in the Mayflower quote unquote left or whatever. It's just man, I don't know. It's an interesting point to be, and I'm glad and very hopeful for the future. I'm glad we have people like Jorge Chad Nieves. I'm glad that we have people like Comrade Elder, Andy, Hy Thurman, because not only can you guys paint a picture of what it was, you know, things haven't necessarily changed. So based off of y'all's experiences and ideas and advice, we can forge a new path forward. And then with that being said, you know, I am hopeful that through the class struggle, we can build solidarity, we can build more factions and cadres of people with the same mentality, and through the sheer number of through the sheer power of numbers, we can kind of affect change, right? Because we're up against a lot
We got to
with
pick up the
state and
legacy and continue it.
for real, 100%,
You know, we
100%,
got to pick up the legacy that was left to us and continue it. We
100%.
can't we can't deviate from that legacy. We got to continue it.
100%. I at least want my children and my neighbors' children and their children to come into something a hell of a lot better than we're dealing with.
Exactly. Exactly. So we got to make it better for our children's, for our future children. We got to make it better,
Yes, sir.
you know,
Amen.
and that's why we got this coalition
Yeah,
to 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 to, to make it, you know, to make things a little better. It's not going to get better, but it's going to get better than what it is.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm looking at time, comrades, and we're at the 2 hour mark. Man, this has been dope. I can't wait for next Mondays. Y'all stay tuned. We have readings certain days of the week. They're posted online. And then we'll be back next Monday. And I don't know if Comrade Sister Anna can end with an all power to the people, but it's usually on Mondays. I like doing a countdown, right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. and then we all saying all power to the people. And then I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And Comrade Elder Andy says, yes, powerful testimony. Yes, thank you, Comrade Jorge, and thank you all. Thank you guys all for making time to be a part of this discussion, because honestly, talking with y'all, this gives me that feed, right? Now I'm juiced, man. Where's the march at? I'm ready to go. All right, so I'm gonna count down from 5 and all the way to 1, and then we'll all say all power to the people, and then I'll stop the recording, okay? All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All power to the
All
people.
power to the people.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this.
To the people.